one of the prime ministers of New York. I really welcome some change. So I nobody, none of you and have ever heard of me. I'm an expert on the Middle East and the Ottoman Empire. It happens to be that Claudio and I have a many projects in common at the Institute where we work on issues of toleration and another project on secularism where Mexico and Turkey have crossed paths through our work. So we know each other for a long time, and more recently we actually work together. And my interest really in this conference is basically a very selfish interest in listening to you all and learning as much as I can about emergent movements in religious movements in Latin America. And one of the reasons for that is I'm still stuck in a sense when I think of Latin America. I'm very much stuck in the proliferation regime. I'm stuck in thinking about the military. In fact, we had a conference on Friday, Saturday, Sunday last week on Tunisia and Egypt in comparative perspective, and much of the discussion of when we talked about the military was in comparison to Chile, to Brazil, to Argentina as cases that have successfully gotten rid of their militaries, and what were the mechanisms of that process, and what can we learn from the Latin American case that hasn't happened in the military government and had democracy for the last 20 years, which is unbelievable and great. And the particular implication of religion and politics in the Middle East, emergent religious movements in the Middle East means the rise of Islamism, Islamic movements, both politicized and militarized and violent, and we all know ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc. So in a sense, for me, I am really interested in understanding how is it that new religious movements emerge in Latin America, and what kinds of conditions they rise to them, and what's their impact on socioeconomic issues, etc. And why is it that, or am I wrong in this understanding that there is less of a political implication with politics and demands from the political sphere? So this is how I got involved in this, and I wanted to learn more. So I will not shut up with the Claudio talk, and I really welcome all of you, and I hope that we have two really wonderful and interesting days of the conversation and discussion.
We care about ensuring a long friendship, a long-time dialogue with this institution. It started with a friendship with not in person or in terms of our dialogue, but institution uses the product. We think that one to just flat use or realize that the material underpinning of this conference is extremely organized. I use direct and use Mexican studies, which is just existence. So thanks for that organization to couple this together into your aspects of things. The fact that this exists and that thanks to that, we're hoping very much that this is also the beginning of set of projects. sense that what we have used over the past 30 years is necessarily is a period of dramatic transformation. And one of the is also the crisis of education in the sense of legal representation, but also media and intellectual representation as well. Societal dynamics, societal change, and this is really a long broken process of political transition. So I think the difference between market and negotiated change is that tension and open market generated, and then the social societal dynamics alongside more measured, slow process of representation. So we're focusing on more collectively ways that we have and certainly and that's true to so because of this non-merchant performance, I thought it would be a good idea to ask to get addresses from a representative from scholarship actually. So kind of decided to like also that's also part of the project that I started. And so our mission is corporations info is just it's also your soul.
Thank you, Karen, and Claudia, for that presentation. Looking forward to these 2 days. As Claudia mentioned, I'm an analysis of politics in America as opposed to kind of focus on all that. And this essential interest is in questions of governance. So some of the issues that Karen brought up about politics. And I have generally 2 working assumptions in my research. The first is that issues defining Americas today isn't some of the questions that Karen raised, like your kind of authority, state violence, but consider democracy, drugs, and security. The other assumption that I continue to work with is that new forms of Christianity are an excellent window into notions of governance at some of the most intimate scales. And so, my first book on processes of democratization was at a new Pentecostal mega church in Guatemala, how Guatemalans can understand themselves as citizens through the Pentecostalism. The second book was just about mission security, and how Protestants, very broad categories, the tribes are being organized back to the end of this. We're not playing like the world, but in a very real way, we folks are changing to define notions of security in Central America. What I'll present on today is ongoing research and work for a third project on drugs and hormones and how Christianity is engaged in notions of drug use and drug violence. Claudia and Karen, in their initial invitation, all of us asked for us to brief before we present our materials. So we've got a thumbnail sketch of how we're engaging in conversation. And I find two points is conceptually really provocative about the way that this conversation has been framed. The first is this notion of emergence or emergent, which has actually been a part of the anthropological literature since the 1990s. So in some sense, it's not it's an appropriate framing, but it has largely been within the domain of medicine, science, law, environment, especially emergence opposed to the dialectical framing of history or functional structural research. Emergence as a framing notion has been extremely productive with law, environment, science, media, but not so much with religion, which I find provocative. The idea of emergent onto the slide. And in that, there's this interesting echo, and I don't know if this is mentioned, this interesting echo in this slide, emergent forms of the slide. There are kinds of elementary forms of the religious life. It's extraordinary. It's something we should think about in the next few days. Durkheim is always saddled with this, and so deeply semiotic functionalism. You have careers built on this. But what's often overread, because they're kind of too quickly foreclosed this possibility, is that so much of the elementary forms of English life have to do with effervescence, as he says, this kind of blanket term that essentially characterizes what he says that society isn't just about individuals, it emerges when people come together, something happens, and that is society. It's the emergent part of Durkheim's margin area, which structures so much distinction that I think is kind of conceptual opportunity. It's a conceptual opportunity for us to think about emergent forms of religious life, because actually when we study religion, it's not, we can think of other framings, but emergence is a very provocative idea. And while Durkheim relies on the sociological, the biological metaphors of his day, and the language of emergence relies on molecular metaphors today, there's actually very good solution. So hopefully they'll push that, at least in my talk, to hopefully model what ethnography of emergent forms of religious life might look like. The second part that I would like to contribute to is this idea of the title of In Mexico. There's a question of what does it mean to talk about a religion of a country? Or what does it mean to cite religious activity? I consider there's a tremendous amount, because much of my field work, much of my activities, oftentimes in Guatemala and history of Guatemala. But one thing that I'm committed to, and this studies that obviously this is I would agree about this, is that certainly we understand religion of a country to just focus on Mexico, versus, like you mentioned, the United States' impact, but also Central America. And what I hope to model today, or describe today, is that when we think about emergent forms of this life in Mexico, we should have a real appreciation for the fact that Mexico is actually contributing to radically new forms of religious life elsewhere. For me, this is Guatemala and research. Yeah, so those are the two kind of the idea of emergence and the idea of Mexico. In Mexico, what was he thinking about religion? I find it provocative. And what I'll offer today is an American piece that looks to model this. Just one last thing, the image studies today are by Benjamin Fogarty about aesthetics at Guatemala National Long-Term Research System 9, and current PhD student in anthropology at Princeton University. He's also a former student of Claudia's here at Columbia, from anthropology. The title is He hunts men, said, to save them. Locked up inside a Pentecostal drug rehabilitation for his use of crack cocaine, Alejandro participates in his pastor's hunting parties. At the outer edge of today's war on drugs, Christian vigilante groups scour the streets of Guatemala City to see their intents. Typical users out of sin by driving them into rehab. So at night, in the middle of the night, capital is an absolute ghost town. 3 or 4 recovering users drive their pastors at house activities. Often at the request of the wife of another who assists to each at its end, they hover over the man while he sleeps. We say a prayer right before. But then it gets physical. One man takes the legs, another takes the grab behind, the fourth, there's the fourth, sometimes we jump around. All the while, the user suddenly and unexpectedly crucified to his dead struggles in the wind. It can be so scary. The hunters, I wonder. Alejandro suddenly seemed confused. How do you think I got here? Yes. I hunted, but I also didn't. My talk this morning considers politics of hunting in Guatemala. The aim is to detail the rapidly emergent form of religious life that might not be in contemporary Mexico, but that is certainly of in crafting Christianity in the service of so much captivity. Alejandro and his pastor track down drug users as if they are animals to remind them, in classic Christian fashion, that they are human. That in the words of so many missionaries before them, it is not enough to be human, one must also act.
These efforts at ontological policing upset an increasingly bundled set of images about pastoralism today. Across the humanities and social sciences for a range of theoretical and methodological commitments, scholars deliver steadfast portraits of neoliberal withdrawal. In terms of law, dispossession and disposability, expulsion and exposure, precarity and social abandonment. While each advances in analytically distinct proposition, each also contributes to a single powerful image of the failed shepherd, of people about to die. Hunting tells a different story. And subplot is not that the masses have been behind, instead of more constructive reading, a more challenging line of inquiry is that they've been given a head start. I climbed out that window, before they put the bars up. On the second floor of an abandoned apartment building, one renovated for rehabilitation allowed all the gestures towards the light. I slid out that window, hung from the sill, and then dropped to the side. A slight man in his mid-30s, Alejandro, off the wax, still philosophical, but this time he did. I was high a few hours later, he said. But I made sure I got it done. I knew that the pastor would come to me. I knew they would come to me. The pastor did. The details of this hunt repeat themselves across Guatemala City with such consistency that one begins to wonder whether the failed shepherd is really such a failure after all. The shepherd seems quite capable of catching and releasing his prey. This last point provides pastoralism with complete reference. The politics nipping at the heels of Alejandro's part, that window mansion, that sill and drops to that sidewalk, is not the dignity of management. It's an anthropology of acquisition. An anthropology of acquisition is a conception of the human that can be tracked, captured, and released only to be hunted. The huntable human has multiple histories, but in Guatemala, for Alejandro, so much of this history is in Mexico. I am convinced, President Richard Nixon announced in 1871, that the only way to fight this medicine drug abuse is by attacking it on many fronts. And attack it did. With the fumigation of Mexican hemp fields, and crackdown on Mexican marijuana seeds. But this military might did little more than kill enough cannabis to keep the United States' interest in cocaine. As the historic cocaine corridors connected Medellin, Miami, Colorado, Mexico, all that way to Peru. The United States responded hugely militarized anti-drug policies that these increasingly expensive and progressive effective maritime blockades simply prompted traffickers to shift their transport operations to the sea land, making Central America a principal transit. Today, planes, boats, and submarines carry cocaine along the Pacific coast north of Guatemala. There, beyond the reach of U.S. interdiction efforts, traffickers prefer the product for its eventual trip north, and they do so at a growing clip. In 2004, some 10% of cocaine produced in the Andes and mountains of the United States passed through Guatemala. Today, some 80% of Canadian cocaine touches Guatemala soil. The militarization of Mexico has only made matters worse. By taking the fight to the cartels, Calderon's war on drugs has upset long-established transit routes in ways that make Mexico increasingly difficult to navigate. And so much of this cocaine now sits in Guatemala, waiting for the state custody. Of interest is that the storage and movement of all this cocaine comes with considerable logistics, equipment, labor, infrastructure, traffickers do all of these led to big medical impact. Said that they were cocaine, which actually holds very little value. This is phenomenon of Guatemala before the drug. To monetize this material to cocaine and cash, laboratories mix the drug with baking soda and crack. Now sold throughout Guatemala, crack cocaine is far more compared to powder. Smoke for a pipe and rock at a time, crack is as intense as it is cheap as it's speed. Crack can be used in any form. The United States has observed with desperation that growing urban violence and slightly racist anti-drug policies in ways that triple the country's prison population. In Guatemala City, the homicide rate nearly 10 times the U.S. average. Crack cocaine has now been criminalized as Pentecostalism. The Pentecostalization of crack begins with form. A growing network of informal and largely unregulated Pentecostal drug rehabilitation centers warehouse users against the law. These centers are one-time garages, factories, mortuaries, barracks, and apartment buildings. Each has been repurposed for rehabilitation with razor wire, steel bars, and iron gates. Inside, pastors practice a kind of theological therapy. This is a mashup of Pentecostal theology, books that programmed in some college. Its most basic assumption is that captivity will give way to conversion, and where it does. Yet this false fact has done nothing to slow the growth of the centers. The reason is simple: these centers provide a practical solution to a concrete problem. Drug use is up, state resources are down, and Pentecostalism is the discourse of change. Jesus says. The net result is a shadow pastoral system infused with Pentecostal imperatives about not just sin and salvation, but also who can be hunted and why. It's a theological construction that carries considerable consequences. Today, more Guatemalans find themselves literally tied up in Pentecostal drug rehabilitation centers and locked up in maximum security prisons. Populating these centers presented pastors with a fundamental challenge. Users do not want to enter rehab because nothing's constant. And so users must be brought to rehab and must be hunted. There is near consensus about this last point. The police condone hunting, families pay for the service, and centers profit from the hunting, both financially and spiritually. Much of this has to do with immediate context. There's also great theological precedent to the hunting of wayward souls. Consider the crozier, the shepherd's crow, that abiding symbol of pastoral power. It bends at the top, fashioned in such a way as to fit tightly around the neck of the animal. I will send for many hunters, reads Jeremiah 16:16, and they will hunt them down every mountain, from the crevices of the mountains. To read this rod on its own terms is to appreciate pastoralism's physicality. A combination of pulling and prodding, dragging and drawing, pulls in a context that iconic image of Christ the shepherd, with the sheep on his shoulders. And now Christ, to get that sheep on his shoulder, was to grab the beast by its legs and control its neck. Not unlike a user suddenly and unexpectedly crucified to his death, the sheep must have struggled in vain. It's an unsettling image to which Alejandro's pastor replied with the words of inspiration: I do not kidnap them, I rescue them. The pastor's distinction is open to interpretation, but in the end, it's interpretation which he has opens himself, not simply by allowing the shadow of his work, but also by lighting the center with theology and self-creation. One mural stands out. Across the top of the wall, just outside the pastor's office, is Isaiah 40, verse 30, 31. Quote, "But those who hope in the Lord will soar on wings like eagles." The mural could have been plastic fish icon. The passage has long evoked the image of soaring eagles, like symbolizing the resurrection or ascension of Christ. And yet here in the center, for this pastor, the eagle on the wall is not ascending, it is guiding, with the tabernacle drawing. This early prayer is empty. God the Father, the pastor once used, has a fish in one hand and a whip in the other. Comparing salvation and slavery to fish in the whip, the pastor makes intuitive, he often overlooks this observation that predation underlies the pastoral. Yet hunting as pastoral mandate too often fades from sight. This is because scholarship about pastoralism tends to pivot with these archetypes. The first is the good shepherd, who governs with constant kindness. What shall coax all the art of conducting, directing, guiding, taking hand, and manipulating them. His counterpart is the bad shepherd, who disperses the flock, lets them die, and shears the only promise. This strict dichotomy between the good and the bad shepherd yields an analytic division between promise and humanitarian intervention in zones of social mandate. The former aligns with studies of biopolitics. The latter invokes what Giorgio Nolan takes to be progressive animalization management. Foucault says bestialization of biopolitics. Yet what is ethnographically obvious throughout Guatemala is that at the very limits of the pastor, where the state is absent and the schools are unmanageable, the shepherd neither administers nor abandons the sheep. Instead, he makes them support. What would you have done? The question immediately shifted my status from observer to participant. I sat in a modest two-room structure on the outer edges of the city. I spoke with the mother, brother, and sister of Santiago. 4 months earlier, Santiago's use of crack cocaine had left his family no other choice than to commit him to a Pentecostal drug rehabilitation center. Up all hours of the night and gone for days on end, crack cocaine had left Santiago unable to work with his job. And so Santiago began to steal from his family. This meant taking cash straight from their pockets, but also stealing hard-earned clients from their notes. Santiago sold the family's microwave, and he's a father. He sold my table saw to his brother. That machine was how he made money with it. Santiago also started running into trouble with dealers. They would sell to Santiago, but they were also obviously upset with Santiago. One young man came looking for Santiago at his home. He had a gun. The family called the pastor on Santiago. Santiago is in his early 20s. He's fit, broad-shouldered, with a finger. He also has absolutely no interest in entering a drug rehabilitation center. Santiago's mother spite, his sister critique, his brother away. The drug rehabilitation center is also an hour away from his home, and so with no steady access to either a car or foot strength, there was no conceivable way for the family to get Santiago to the center without having him present. Already stretching the family's budget, haggling with the pastor over Santiago's monthly fees, even downgrading Santiago's stay from bed to a floor mat. The family eventually paid a lump sum to transport Santiago from the streets to the center. Alejandro, the owners. How many? Alejandro asked. How many numbers in his family? 300? He quickly checked and said, no, I've been on over 300. Alejandro's best guess signals years spent inside the Pentecostal drug rehabilitation centers, as well as the bright divide that his experience travels. Prior to the militarization of Mexico in 2006, when there were only dozens rather than hundreds of Pentecostal drug rehabilitation centers in Guatemala City, hunting parties tended to track down and capture those who drank too much. This was a different kind of drug, a different set of techniques. Alcohol slows down the user, even puts him to sleep, which can make hunting look a lot like fishing. He drank, Alejandro explained, you let him drink, and then you give him more drink, so he couldn't talk, so he couldn't walk, and then you take. Asked in a bit of debate, Alejandro would really user after user. The problem is that while alcohol slows down the user, crack cocaine speeds him up. Vaporized and lighter than absorbed in the lungs, crack cocaine hits the bloodstream almost immediately, flooding the brain with dopamine. This jolt causes crack cocaine to turn to the same time. It also constricts blood vessels, pupils, and increases body temperature, heart rate, and blood pressure. But this euphoria only lasts about 5 minutes, and less crack is quality, and crack sold in it's almost always quality. It is, in fact, a sudden spike in equally abrasive drop that fosters the peacefully resting intercession. This is why the biochemical effects of crack cocaine can be in matters of public safety and citizenship security. Santiago could stay drunk in Guatemala for less than $1 per day. Rubbing alcohol is incredibly cheap. It is also unbelievably accessible. Santiago was not able to get it. He wants to get high, he wants to stay high. The problem is that a 2-hour crack session costs upwards of $100 with street value before off-brand smartphones. And so theft, smuggling, and home invasion, the back alley sale of microwaves, and things like that, often accompany the use of crack cocaine. Worse for Alejandro, crack cocaine does not slow down the use, but rather speeds up. Oh, it can get bad, Alejandro admitted. The mother had to pick up her son the other day, and the problem was that he was high in the machine. And so he took off running once he saw us. He chased him and he climbed up a 3-story building. Alejandro paused to let me imagine the scene. He made it all the way up to it, and along the way he picked up a knife. The problem was obvious, at least to me, but Alejandro was pointed out. He had the high ground, and there was only one ladder to the roof. So it was impossible to get up there without getting up. What did you do? I asked. Raided him out. Then we distracted him while 2 guys stayed on the other side of the building Alejandro shaking his head. That went to 5 hours. Santiago did not make it 10 years. And we waited until he was asleep. After entering the house in the middle of the night, his men quietly searched the room for weapons until Santiago was free. Once the room was secure, they grabbed Santiago, tied him up, and threw him back in the truck. The only hitch came when Alejandro had to transfer Santiago from the truck to the center. There was a short open stretch between the curb and the center's front door that seemed inconsequential and touching concrete. Yet it was always unheard of. The hunted can lull their hunters into a sense of calm now and then, and reach for a final jolt of energy of sheer desperation when the user finds himself out of the truck, but not yet inside the center. Santiago made a run for it, and he didn't get very far. And then pulled him into the center and locked him behind his door. There was even some pleasure in the process of these stories. The smile of Santiago struggled with join and feeling. Santiago never had a chance. But undergirding this affect, thrill of the they have clear Christian principle. So it's about saving a life. That's why we keep these guys hiding up the track. The image of Santiago hamstrung returned to me when his brother repeated his question. But really, he asked, what have you done? Already 4 months into Santiago's captivity, knowing that Santiago had suffered every night while some kid with a gun waiting for him in the streets, I answered the brother with an unfortunate degree of certainty. I would have had a month, I said. Absolutely certain. Testing my confidence was the knowledge that the hunt continues long after the capture. The first days inside the center can be unbearable, often spent inside the morgue. There's a barn closet set aside for detox. Alejandro knows the morgue all too well. I woke up there, Alejandro, and I asked the guy next to me to stop me if I tried this. The man said he wouldn't. So I got up and started acting crazy. The pastor unlocked the door to the morgue to see what's going on, which allowed Alejandro to push past and grab a chair and start hitting the beam, which was awesome. But in the outer fear, Alejandro screamed violent drinks. The pastor had someone fetch 2 glasses of liquor, which the pastor keeps to soften tensions. They must have had pills in them, Alejandro confessed. But it started to get all quiet. I was all wired up on cocaine. I started to calm down. Alejandro was a man. I had an 8-ball of cocaine before I got picked up. I smoked some rocks the night before, but they just kept giving me pills and drinks. Alejandro eventually settled and stopped. Santiago proved a more submissive subject than Alejandro. He struggled when they dragged him across his last few years of freedom, but then he quietly retreated into the corner of the center. He kept himself often for days on end, wearing the only sweatshirt he owned with a hood that covered much of his face. Santiago would squat in the back of the room as visiting pastors delivered sermons on the saving graces of Jesus Christ. How many people here feel blessed to be alive when visiting pastor? Amen, pastor answered to himself. Because life is a blessing. The visiting pastor, stood firmly behind the lectern. So I ask you, what is your intention? I suddenly felt a piece of paper pushed into my pocket. What's your purpose in life? The pastor asked. I turned to see Santiago settling back into his corner. My purpose, is to tell you that Jesus has come to give all of us. I fished a note from my pocket as the pastor's soul struggles between both of heaven. It was a letter, Santiago, and an apology to his family. Oh, you can tell how often those pastors. When a person changes, there's a change in his physical status. His hygiene starts to change, starts to fix himself, change himself. We sat on the other side of the box gate, and then without general populations, we spoke in the pastor's mouth. There are those who don't want to change. Their hearts are hard, but a fixed person is a leader. He follows the rules. Later in the day, while much of my conversation with the pastor still echoed in my ears, I opened Santiago's letter. It was addressed to his mother, brother, and sister. How are you? I'm feeling better now that I'm inside this. I'm going to handle myself differently. The letter model of the sincerity that the pastor has just described, the sincerity that seems to mark the beginning of your teaching. I'm really happy because I'm not on drugs. Let's continue. I'm not drunk. This place is giving me some time to think. I'm better now. Santiago worked hard to make exterior what will always be from the inside. Sincerity of faith, true conversion, meaning of radical change. The exterior reflects the interior of the humble, as the pastor explained to you that. The person who is right with God is going to show it in the face. They're going to comport themselves in this. As the pastor's missionary logic confused otherness with disorder, and salvation with rectitude, Santiago's letter rolled on itself trying to fuse together language, personal character, and personal truth. I hope, on the road, that you can forgive me for everything, for all the stuff I took in my house. Forgive me, please. I'm sorry. The pastor had lectured on systematizing his vast experiences of clear Christian ordinance. But there are people who said, just don't care. They come here and they act the same way inside the center as they do outside. But the most important is the interior of the person. And we can fix what's going on inside the person. And we can set that person free. The pastor could be qualified as conditional groups. That is spiritualism. We can set that person free. Spiritualism. With physical liberation increasingly out of reach, Santiago's letter nonetheless seems an honest first step towards spiritual. Regret, concession, repentance, it all seem to fit the genre. Santiago seems to be doing things with words. Then he suddenly slipped in slow motion, tumbling over himself with every word that he wrote down. When you come, Santiago asked meekly after apologize, without even a line break to mark a new thought. Could you bring some sugar and some bread? The request was honest, but it also felt shallow. It was too soon, considering how much and for how long Santiago had made him stand in the sun. The request also made Santiago seem completely unaware, that the apology is a process in which a person's involved is split into two parts. The part that's guilty of an offense, and the part that disassociates itself from the offense, and affirms the belief, and the rule. Santiago seemed incapable of splitting himself into two parts. So his request rolled on. Could you also bring beans, coffee, soup, milk, and fried chickens and fish fries? This was an apology of something from a French grocery list. And some juice, cookies, sardines, mayonnaise, a few of those muffins that you brought last time, 10 pieces of fruit and a cup of chicken. At a certain point, the apology faded from sight. What can you be forgiven for missing the apology altogether? Would you also bring 5 pounds of rice, 5 pounds of beans, a liter of Coca-Cola? To Santiago's credit, his listening center speaks. The men are chronically underfed, and Santiago had already lost his stability. But his letter, as some effort, had escaped obvious necessity. Every item requested evidence of interior needed further rehabilitation. Could you get me some deodorant, and some toothpaste, some floss, some soap to wash my hands, 5 tubes of glue, 2 razors, 2 towels of aspirin, 2 towels of glue. Santiago misplaces apology. But there are people who just don't care if that's repeated as if they haven't read something else. The way they comport themselves in the streets is the way they comport themselves. Santiago's brother read the letter as I sat with his sister. He shook his head, and the letter obviously upset him. With what seemed to be true sincerity, he announced with gritted teeth to stay there for another year. For another year. His sister sat quietly as the brother then turned to me and asked me another question. What do you think about that? A year sounded extreme, they said. Yet there were certainly no other institutions in Guatemala willing or able to take some. Guatemala's prisons sit at 250% capacity, but hospitals have no room. Guatemala's only mental institution understands drug use as well as episode its mission. The centers are the only options. For Santiago, but also for his family. And what is obvious about these centers regarding sincerity and salvation is that the only way for the hunted to truly escape the center is for the hunted to reverse his position, to become a hunter. This can be a literal transition. The user can rise from a center ranks until he has earned enough privileges to join an actual hunting party. But this reversal also comes through a conversion of sorts, an object to subject, from being hunted because of sin, hunting oneself because of sin. This turn inwards includes thinking like a hunter, reasoning like a hunter, and understanding at a rather fundamental level why sinners must be hunted. And central to this new subjectivity is the recognition that classic Christian techniques of self-governance allow the hunted to hunt themselves. Part of this process involves surveying the grounds. With Socratic flair in place of sermon, Alejandro's pastor commanded the attention of users, walking them through a theological technology driven by a hierarchical imagination. With the pastor standing and the users sitting, he walked them through the place of sin. He told them where to look, how to find it when the flesh was covered. He posted a map and graphically chalkboard. The image was unpretentious but effective. Imagine silhouette of a gingerbread. What's the sign of sin? I asked. There are many, one eager man offered. There are bad words and sloppy clothes. The pastor wrote the words just next to the figure's body. Another user added eager earnestness, and there's bad character and selfishness. There's ambitiousness and impulsiveness. The group slowly mapped the sinner's exterior world. Anger, another one. But inside the person, what's the sign of sin? The same group users collaborated on another list: resentment, frustration, arrogance, and paranoia. The list grew as the pastor inscribed the words atop and inside the stick. Stuck up, conceived bitter trouble. In fact, inquired the pastor, specific endpoint obviously in mind. Lies, lack of faith, pride, and revolution. The user sat with all, the pastor smiled. The other 38 users in attendance remained absolutely silent. Some paid attention, but others whispered to each other. Many more stared straight ahead, half focusing their attention on the board reading really neat. The cluster swept them back. Santiago joined them and stood over his head. His eyes were directed at his lips. He seemed to be waiting for the sermon as well as his captivity to just end. The doors swung open and his life to begin again. The sermon did not end. This is one reason why those three users proved to be so keen. Sincerity seemed to be the only way out of the center, and performed this sincerity by spotting the places, suggested that the user himself was on the front. Engaging sermons, offering testimonies, and sitting up straight at the next user leads to added divisions. This might begin with direction of prayer session, but then can develop to manage the door and the kitchen. The kitchen is a big step. In open air space, so room for escape, the kitchen staff gains access to a set of dull rooms. The user's ability to control themselves by serving with sincerity and rock steady evidence of interior change to flow. And Santiago never really engaged, instead he performed insincerity almost at less than minutes. Santiago shrugged. Alejandro always did the opposite. Once tracked and captured after being released from work, his very best work his way off. This does not mean that Alejandro never stumbles. In one heroic run, Alejandro even reached the kitchen, but then his temperament shifted. He simply could not spend another night inside, on the floor, next to the user. He had already been inside for 3 months when he lifted the knife in the kitchen. But it took the road of visiting pastor and walked himself and the pastor out of the gate. It was those last 10 meters of freedom that shook him up. Terrible timing placed a hunting party at the front door just as Alejandro was making his break. The AGB house would shout. And he rebounded as he always does, until he graduated yet again to a hunting party. hunting is the most prized position. They know that the hunter can just take off. You just run away during the hunt. You have to know that the hunter is sincere. And of course, the hunter is not always sincere. There are numerous stories of the hunting party using that before suddenly becoming a group of three. It's a remarkable moment of reversal. When the hunter makes a break for it, the hunter suddenly becomes the hunter. Once the others complete their immediate task instead of finding peace. Alejandro has been on the land many times. It was about 5 days after I escaped, he said, I was headed into the shop. Guys walked to me and they're like, okay, Alejandro, come on, we're going to get you. So I said, all right, let's go outside. And Alejandro went outside, took off his shirt, and said, we're not the center anymore. One of my blocks, so take me. Beat me and take me. It turns out they could. So he did. As I move towards my conclusion, let me know that you see the endless cycle of hunting and being hunted in the streets and hospital times pales in comparison to the ensnaring of the interior self. This more intimate reversal draws from a broader Pentecostal commitment to prohibition that actively folds or doubles the subject, that splits the user into two. Much of this folding begins when users recognize the centuries as a source of their moral obligation, a place where they can transform and work on these things. But much of this also pivots atop the idea that the user, because he's not a Christian, must hunt himself because he is always the center. Often brought to the center, kicking and screaming, the folding or doubling often entails the user dragging his own self back to the center, sometimes. The sight is actually difficult to witness and understand. Take one more young man as an example. Physically strong and long history, yet escaped from the center. He then returned some days later on his own accord, in search of help to sober up. But the pastor did not let him into the center. And yet the young man waited outside the front door for 7 days. And so, reeling from withdrawal, squatted in that threshold of freedom across the city's 10 years, pleading for the pastor to drag him inside the center, to lock his steel door, just walking into that. The scene was pathetic and made even more so each time I crossed the user's path to enter the center. When I did, the young man grabbed me out, pulled me close and asked X on his day to take me. So I was sneaking into the center. The pastor would then preach that the gate is narrow. This was an obvious reference to Luke chapter 13, verses 23 to 30. This parable places the sinner just outside of heaven. Make every effort to enter through the narrow door, passage, please. Because many, I tell you, try to enter and not be able to. The pastor preaches this parable in explicitly apocalyptic terms, provoking a kind of impromptu passion play that brings to life the very Pentecostal media that so often litters the Sunday school. Where we spend eternity, the pastor asks. It was a moral imperative stated in the form of a question. But how much of a question can this really be? Who would truly choose blameless? The question as it's posed by the pastor felt like a spur urging the sinner through those gates and intended. If the question is not just a method, it is indeed also a question. But the question here is not which side of the bridge the user should choose. That much is obvious. The question instead is whether the center is heaven or whether the center is hell. Are the streets of Guatemala City on fire or is the center itself on flames? An answer to any one of those questions is not obvious to me, but it was for this young man. For he had been hunted. He's been hunted because the pastor has one word. The user has no idea which way to turn. And he has also been hunted because the pastor has a right where he wants it. Outside his door, frantic to re-enter and splayed out on a cross that appears to be the user's domain. And yet the question is implied subjectivity flattens the historical condition under which the very question has been asked. These conditions include Guatemala's legal state agencies, militarization of Mexico, the cartels, near endless potential for misinformation. The United States is multi-billion-dollar growing funds, as well as its continued demand for energy. These developments have converged in such a way as to produce not just alternative formations of nationalism, but also emergent forms of legislation. And this life's point of reference is not the classic political binary that Castro mandated to make liberals that die. It is instead a more simple statement to funds for me.
First, are is the language, is it always framed in terms of Pascaria and not Escape or rescue?
Yeah.
And are these groups generally affiliated with established denominations? And there's, it's my understanding that cocaine is long those that are being defined by you haven't seen that.
Yeah, so there is a big philosophical debate about the hunting issue to your first question. It's the same thing in terms of demographics, so the language of hunting issue. I actually question Mr. Christian thought whether there really is a theological distinction between hunting and fishing, but the material itself is really fun. Unless it's opposed to fishing, which is much different metaphor has its own. In terms of that, yeah, that's the future. No, so yeah, there is meth production level, like certainly not as in the States. And the prime mover right now is although cocaine is going down in terms of its demand, the amount of tons that move from Guatemala. So in terms of emergence, I mean, it's amazing. Now I'm doing field work in Guatemala since and these centers are just private. There's dozens for a while. And then 2006, 2007, 2008, we grow very, very quickly. So the project, writing is a historical project about the first center in Guatemala, first center in Central America, which was founded by this former military Pentecostal. It's about prison. And what he did was found a center in Guatemala City and began to define a way in which drugs understood, brought the beach to proliferate former users who come out of central suffering center. And wanted to make pretty clear connections between this first center and but that once it's rapid connection, oh yeah, no, not at all. I mean, you can go back to not at all. These are really amazing methods of testing. I don't know of each one that I'm aware of and that I really focus on before that really dig deep into a graph actual. But all are not
Where do you go?
Looking at all that or one that you cannot kidnapping.
Absolutely.
Or what?
Yes. Yeah, so the question is about legality in the state. So two answers. One is very strong arguments made for human rights violations. I've written for against about these centers. They are at least on 3 counts extreme violations of human rights. In practice, which is a major part of the research, is the state's reliance on the centers. The state didn't really enjoy these centers. The number of trial detainees, so prison systems thrown into that is straining the state. So much of my fieldwork is actually within pre-trial with the judges and who were brought to court because of drug judge's knowledge of these subjects is very good. A sense of what they're like. And there's very little state control. There's one, in terms of the Ministry of Public Health, there's one person in charge of monitoring all these centers. So the state is very, very flexible. The state enjoys these centers. They use this. But it's a real life issue. I mean, taking from the streets is not an unfamiliar sight in the city. Though one shouldn't associate this with the experience.
So just associated with that, I was wondering, and at one point you sort of very firmly differentiated, this language of, like you said, the anthropology of acquisition and not abandonment. Right?
Yes.
So I was wondering if there are, if it's just Christianity that's kind of determining this dynamics of language of predation, or if there are particular aspects of the Guatemalan state and the way in which it is absent of itself that create predation.
Yeah, in many ways, in which that biblical metaphor of the pasture has become a metaphor to think about governance beyond the Christian context. I find that this Christian moment helps us think about predation even outside of the Christian context. So, really excited research on distortion. But the stuff that I do like paramilitary squads for active gang members, essentially the war on drugs is read as, yes, so in terms of predation as a framework for understanding governance, Christian concept. There's really an emerging, this is kind of a side conversation, I know, but like an emerging, again, uncoordinated person scholarship, technology, concepts of philosophy that state predation is serious.
Relating to what Roberto mentioned, what is the energy? How do they feel with the best actual numbers? I know some centers in New Mexico City and in Seattle, they have doctors who the abilities sign in case they die. So yes, it is a certain number of them are just too far beyond, and they don't survive treatment. Yes. So how do I see all these like storefront rehabilitation centers? Yes. How do they do when people die?
So Mexico is a tremendous. So these centers is a genre of activity. So Mexico City, so I would probably Angela Garcia Stanford research in Mexico City, where the estimation like weird estimation of 2,000 centers. Okay, they're a lot. But no, it's very similar. They're Catholic. We just talk about what theology organizes. That, but in terms of that, absolutely. So those, there are kind of two moments of two archival moments, two moments of signature. One is when you enter and you sign. These are sign a piece of paper that gives the center full rights. So you really need to, but that's always the percentage that happens. I mean, you hunted it right. It's always considered. When you leave, say, I remember history. But it is when you walk in, you sign that gives you rights. And then, of course, so Guatemala statistics have only recently changed. So there is 2% of homicide as a result of so that a drug user dies, very skinny drug user in the body. But no, that's very important part. With the bodies, we probably usually call in very difficult moments.
I didn't go into the keeping that they said those cases were safe. That's what I wanted to find in this
extra service in place for people. But I was Santiago was hiding from this kid in the street in some sense. So they are just a hiding. They aren't. No one had. There's no immediate threat to that population. That kind of violent threat. There's one major human rights violations is locking people into. Oftentimes you don't know where the key is. You get to leave. You don't know how to leave at least one time. There's a tremendous risk of fire. And so if we're on this is a center, and we're all locked into the center. But if we were a center and no one knows where the key is, and there's a fire, very, very amazing. There's a tremendous amount of downtime. So sometimes, what makes me such an excellent example of passive is that a pastor can own a space. It could be half of his house or an abandoned factory. There's a whole parallel history of abandoned buildings that those quarters of the world. One of these spaces. It's a great way to make some money. To have a pastor who's rarely present, though the people inside, there's a hierarchy, and some people manage restricted labor, they manage, but there's no technical or there. Sometimes there's a 12-step version where there's a lot of testimony. So this would be a very common. I would be up here telling a story that someone would come up with telling a story, and then you would cite it phase. But what was important about the Pentecostal language is that the important assumption is a very bright beforehand. Santiago was made for America to change, where in the next was in Mexico, where it's largely Catholic, there's a my understanding is a much more progressive logic. So you got one who's going to become that terribly worse. But the image that it's kind of a very progressive notion, progressive temporality. We return to that last slide of the pamphlet. There's nothing progressive about that. There's nothing temporal at the end of times. Like where do you want to go? You're there. It's very different.
As you know, a lot of artists out there, they're not also doing this well.
No, man, you don't go to a cabinet and like pitch up the crap. It's not a big. There is, of course, some overlay, right? But no, Pentecostals have really dominated the industry. Absolutely. I don't know of any Catholic center that is charismatic. Some non-denominational, quasi-biomedical, but still very strong. It's right in the sense of the classic missionary dilemma of how do you know that convert is actually read properly? What are the semiotics of sincerity or truth? And so there is where the exterior becomes the evidence of experience. So this is the classic like missionaries try and have people wear their Sunday best. What's that? Yeah. And so what happens in practice is that people are really trying to perform this. really a effort to perform a certain kind of sincerity to the pastors and report back to the family. But you're right, though, there is this leader also probably having a lack of attention to psychological dimensions, real attention to how the body is.
So to like that's getting up and talking.
Yes, that's very little words, but that would know that you would be willing and excited to go up there, and the tone of your voice would suggest that you're engaged instead of, because we've all heard your story, you've heard it I've heard it 30 times. I know before and after. But if you can perform that with real energy and understand that those are the mechanics. Yes. Yes. I see. Yeah, so I see it's different goals and effervescence. One is like it's important moment to flag that there is no effervescence a lot of times. So I see three really engaged care of us about what has to be saying. But there is a real lack of effervescence. But in terms of your larger project about collectivities dividing, so I'm not sure say so much as like interior exterior, but it's how do you mark both materially and morally inside of the center as opposed to outside the center, but also inside the user and outside the center. I think those kind of markings are where I would No, thank you.
Sí, es muy interesante. Es más, está recuperando de pues no sé, a lo mejor lo que es que porque ya hay, pues, si lo ves que tengo también son fondos para sí, bueno,
Cuando ustedes hablan de la colonización, menos mal que lo
wanted to say one thing that one of the major points that we're observing here is the violating both holy and pastoral. And this is all in for the sake of this emergent form, which is the policy. So our first session as well as expected.
Maybe it's going to be easier if I can so well, thank you very much for the invitation. This myself, I always enjoy when I'm invited to New York. I prefer to be invited to baseball season. I start only next week, at least I'm gonna miss that. But anyway, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this invitation. It's really a real honor to be here. So I'm gonna talk about a broader subject, which is new challenges for Catholics and Catholics in rural Mexico. So, point is that as we all know, even though Catholicism is the religion of the great majority of Mexicans, and I think it's still hegemonic in terms of culture. The point is that we can no longer claim that centrality. Okay, so my point here is that Catholics experiencing this triple transformation, and it has to do with three problems that all Catholics are facing. First one is the drastic reduction of membership. We are going to see that years abroad. Most of you know that I did it mainly for establishing a broader knowledge and broader perspective on this. So we have drastic reduction of membership, and of course that has an impact. Now Catholics and Catholics see themselves in a more plural society. I say open because I think historically speaking, we have been plural in terms of cooperation, but it was not recognized as such. So Catholicism was really plural, but this is the first time that Catholics and the rest of Mexicans recognize the society, Mexican society, as a plural society. When it starts to recognize although it's been always like that, I think. So secondly, we have increasing secularization in society, and that's one of the points that I want to show here. How and why and how can we speak of that in Mexican terms, let's say. And of course, that has also an impact in a diminishing way of Catholic Church. And of course, that makes great difference. So the other question that religious pluralism, as long as it is more and more recognized, poses problems concerning national identity. So some of us think of some of Mexicans think of Mexico as Catholic or Guadalupe, and we still have that. As you know, maybe 2 weeks ago, the Pope said in an interview to a TV channel in Mexico that Mexico was all Guadalupe, all are Guadalupanos, even non-believers, Protestants, all are Guadalupanos. And of course, that's not true, but that's how most people used to see Mexico up to, let's say, 20, 30 years ago. And this way of talking of the Pope shows up to what point that's still important. So with the other question that we can see how pluralism is observed by Mexicans in the sense that religious dissidents, the way Stan used to talk about that. We talk about cults, not what we say in Mexico, sectas, cults. So most people were Catholics and the rest were cults, sectas, in a very demeaning and negative way. So, and the other point is that we are seeing now the arrival of new social and cultural notions that did not exist really in Mexico up to, let's say, 30, 40 years ago. The notion of pluralism, the notion of tolerance, the notion of respect, the notion of kindness. Those are new notions in the religious field. So if we see this, to talk about the first one, reduction of membership. Here we have 2000 and 2010. And we have two surveys done in the last year, 2014. The first one is the survey made by Pew Research Center, and I think Andrew is going to talk more about that. This is the only thing I want to say about surveys, so I don't any. But there's another survey made by Católicas for the Derecho a Decidir, which is a branch of Catholics for Choice in Mexico. More or less independent branch, but and it's a very good survey also. I don't know why there's such a big difference. But anyway, what we see is this trend into going down on the membership of Catholics in Mexico. A larger figure shows from 1950, this is only from 60% to 100. Okay, so, but just to show the trend, the long-term trend, you see from in 1950 it was almost 100% of Catholics in Mexico, and then we are going down in the decades following up to 2010, which is 82%, and then you can see again and Protestants also going up at the same time. So we'll have only 1%, a bit more than 1% in 1950 of Protestant. Protestant includes evangelicals also, and going up in terms of percentage up to almost 10% in 2010. This is including the last service that I mentioned. So if you include the last service, either one of you and the other of Católicas, we are looking at this reduction of membership. So we go on the same time. We always think of Mexico as more or less the same trend that Brazil is going, which is going under 60% now. So and this is the rate of religious growth, which is important also. This shows more or less the red one goes more or less at the same level that the blue one down, which is the rate of the growth of population in Mexico, the blue one. So we see how the population, the Catholic population goes more or less at the same rate. But all the others are on the upper level of growth. So we see how, I mean, Jews is kind of difficult because it's such a small population, 50,000, that when it goes from 55 to 60,000, we go there. In a general sense, you see how most of them are going up. And while the Catholics are staying more or less at the same level of the growth of the Mexican rate. So of course we have some repercussions of that. First one is that you see, I'm not going to talk about Protestant just mention this. Protestantism must become more politically active, but at the same time social issues. And we have the increasing recognition of pluralism within the churches and religions, something that before it was even considered. So Catholics, they were all Catholics, and most people didn't even stop to think that among Catholics there were a lot of differences, and that's one of the and the other thing is that we are looking at Catholicism is increasingly detached from moral something of Catholic Church as established by the Church. So what does it mean to be Catholic in Mexico? I think, well, of course, we have to go back to the idea that there are no few religious systems. Most of you are going to talk about that. We can talk about plural religious memberships where someone who considers himself Catholic that has also maybe some courses of Buddhism, and then we go to the pyramids of 21st of March, take some energy from the sun or the cosmos or energy, pure energy or something. That happens, of course, all the time. So if we think of Mexican public identity, of course we have to think of all the difference we have in a country that we say Mexican country. Big difference according to regions, according to level of social classes, level of construction. So anyway, we've been doing this counting on surveys, and if we want to say what's the average Mexican family, so the average Mexican family is a young woman, middle or lower class, living in the West, Occidental Mexico, or the north of Mexico, which is the most, maybe the thing that we're going to see in this survey is the most interesting thing is that how the north is becoming more conservative in a way. But it could be a question of interpretation. More conservative or it's more liberal in terms of kind of libertarian way to say. And of course, we can see also increasing secularization of society, which is defined in many ways. Mainly, as we all know, most scholars would say that secularization is social differentiation. Social differentiation in spheres of action, politics, religion, and economics. So, how do we see that Mexican Catholics are becoming more and more secularized? So this is the first potential of people in a different type of union, marriages and unions. And one of the things we can see at the top is that some people, okay, let me just tell you this is important. This is a survey of Catholics for Choice, of Catholics for their choice in Mexico. It's only about Catholics. So this is not about all Mexicans. This is only Catholics answering the survey. There was someone who was not Catholic out of the survey. So what we're going to see now is a lot of these include only Catholics. So what we see here is more or less 30% of Catholics in Mexico are union libre or civil marriage only, which says a lot about how much Catholics are following, say, the doctrine or sacred. And there are around 30% who are dated by and by the church. Okay. And then that's one Puerto Rican. Okay. So this is a question that was made to Catholics. If the Catholic Church should have more influence in government by group of age. So we see that more or less younger you are, the more anti-intervention of the church in politics. But more or less it's the same. Only if you are over 50, you have a third of people who would say that Catholic Church should have more intervention. Should have more intervention in politics. But most of the young people is 3/4 of young Catholics that they don't like the idea of the Catholic Church having politics. And also, this is another way of presenting that, also by age. How the public servants should be act based on either in the teachings of the church, which is in red, or based on the Emergent opinions that exist in pluralism. So as you can see, it's a very large portion of Catholics. I must again remind Catholics who prefer pluralism, say government by public service. And there's also a question of sanctions. Question of sanctions on the public servant, Catholic public servant, on the upper question. Should the Catholic public servant take decisions based on religious beliefs? So the question is, should be sanctioned in blue and should it be sanctioned in red? So as you can see, more than say 56%, total 55% of Catholics say that public servants, Catholic public servants should be sanctioned. They act based on their religion. The priest, the second one is sanctions to the priest are lowered in the sense that sanctions someone that brings public affairs. So sanctions to priests are still under 50%, but they are not far away from the other. And then we have sanctions to the public servant that uses public resources to support the church. Also, there are some sanctions among more or less half of Catholics. Yeah, exactly. Legal sanctions. So sanctions in general way, but of course, general. And the last one talks about the candidate, political candidate that uses the religion to promote or gain votes. So the sanctions are in the dark room. So that gives you an idea of how Catholics are thinking in relation of religion and politics. And this is percentage of distribution by age of how people think should be or shouldn't be the courses of religion in public schools. As you can see, there's a third more or less of people, particularly in the lower ages, or public religious courses in public schools, and 2/3 of Catholics who wouldn't like the idea of public religious courses in public schools. Yeah, well, that depends on how do you think what a religion course should be. Some people think that a religion course should be about religion in general, but most Catholics, I think, they think of when you ask them of a religious course, they think of Catholicism. So doctrine, religion, Catholic doctrine, or their own at least. I have to remind you again, we're talking only about how Catholics answer this. Also, this is not by age, but by region, which is something that I found in this survey very interesting. That of course we have the north, the west, which is Occidente, the Bajío, which appears always higher. But then we have southeast of Mexico, which is more let's say, more Protestant in general. We have, of course, there. Also accepting public religion courses. But then we have the federal district who wouldn't accept that, it's only a few. And then we have the most interesting thing, I think, is the north, which appears even higher acceptance of religious courses, which goes really against, let's say, like this Mexican tradition of anti-church that's like against religious courses. But I think that we have to examine that more, because that could be either a more conservative standing, we can see that in politics, or we can see that as a more libertarian standing concerning public religion. Let's say it's really important to public school. So, also, we have religious difficult to say they agree with the activities mentioned by priests. For example, if yellow is agreed and orange is non-agreement, should the priest occupy electoral posts like Congress or Senate or any other mandate by the vote? And you can see how the North is going in agreement more than the other regions, even though it's still a minority. You see the difference between regions. And the other one is it's right that the priests should hold for voting in favor of certain candidates or political parties. That's less. But then you still have the North, which is the largest one, 11%. And then you have the organized march with the membership of adventure with the churches to oppose those that allow abortion. Then you have a larger section of that, particularly in the North also. And you see also the federal district on 6%. So that's also a very important regional difference that you can see now in the country. You have not only the West represented here, which is more, let's say, conservative in that sense, but it is also the North and the federal district that has become really a more liberal or city in the large. So also this is for promotion of AIDS, no, so promotion of condoms, excuse me. Promotion of condoms to prevent AIDS. So as you can see, there's no difference. But that's we're speaking of Catholics. So we're talking about 97%, almost 100% of Catholics who are against the teachings of the church in Mexico. And that's of course, that's what we are talking about secularization. That's the second one. Also, agreement in sexual education private schools, you see it's almost 100% set for those who are 60 or more. And then you have also for right of homosexuals, either the right to couple to have the same right for adoption, or just to for marriage, or just to have the same rights. So as you can see, there's a large acceptance, mostly on marriage and same rights. Maybe less on adoption, although it's not a thing. And of course, it's always the 60 or more who are against. Also by region, this is also something that shows you the same thing of sexual and same rights. You can see in red there are 4. In favor of marriage, also we have 60s, 70%. Higher. That shows how the impact of a law has on people. And it's always important to see that the norm. That's why I say this could be a more libertarian or a more liberal conservative standing. In a way. I think we should look on and be more careful. Also, abortion. We have a lot of this is total, the third one, concerning ages also. And the blue, the yellow one is those who are against in any circumstances. The red one, those who are in favor in some circumstances, and blue one, those who are in favor always, as long as the woman is happy. So if you put together red and blue, you have a large proportion of Catholics who are in favor of abortion. except for those who are 60. Okay. No. That's probably why. Yeah, well, I'm not moving. Okay, so we have these abortion in some cases, specified cases, where you can see for some cases, some circumstances, of course, approval is higher. So I'm going to stop here because go longer on that, just to see the differences. If we have, for example, new ones, also in terms of regions, abortion, according to regions acceptance. The question is, what should the Catholic woman that decided to have an abortion should do? The blue one is to confess with a priest, have confession with a priest, and the yellow one is only to confess to God. And the green one is he doesn't have any need to confess. So that gives you an idea of how regions are different. You have a federal district with 90% only according to the green, and mostly only confess to God or no need to confess. And the difference between that and the West, both normal ones have to West, but also they're having like the other regions. This is interesting because it gives you the idea of how Catholics are, what they think. The idea that they have of God. According to that, the orange is someone who protects, and green someone who punches, and how to say, rewards, exactly, or rewards, and then someone who forgives. So as you can see, most Mexican Catholics think God is someone that protects or forgives. And this is interesting because I've been thinking why we have such a violent society being so Catholic. Not only in Mexico, Latin America. And maybe this helps. I mean, I'm trying to really get into that. And I think this answer helps us to understand that. Because Catholics think that God is not someone who's going to punish or reward. He's going to protect or to forgive, as you can see. And this is even more interesting because this is according to the values that the Catholic Church promotes. What do you think more important? So this one is love, the lower part, and then you have freedom, 7%. Well, you don't have the total. You have 33% of love, then you have a small portion, 4% of freedom, 17% of forgiveness, 32% of respect. The orange one is misericordia, which is mercy, and obedience is a very small part, and justice is even smaller. So, to me, this shows why we are so violent and we don't obey any laws. Because we are really Catholic in this way of thinking of, let's say, according to those what the church promotes, almost no one is really interested in justice. For them, their religion has nothing to do with justice. For them, the religion has almost nothing to do with freedom. It has to do with love, respect, or forgiveness. You have respect or respect others or respect yourself. It's a very large thing. It's a like what? Could be also that, I mean, it's a large idea of respect. But the most interesting thing to me is that justice and freedom are almost out of our idea of happiness. Our idea of happiness. Religion is not connected to that. But I mean, that's the only thing I have found to understand why we are so violent in this region. I mean, in Latin America. Okay, so well, I'm gonna stop there. This is also interesting because that shows you what kind of Catholics we are. This is a question. If they know the name of the current Pope, and only two-thirds in some cases, half of the people know the name of Francisco or Gregorio. Almost 10% of the population, 30 to 40% of the population of Catholics, they don't even know the name of the Pope. Contrary to what we think that we are really focused which is not, I mean, should be considered that. So the third thing is the secular state, something that I've been working on a lot in the past few years, and I'm not going to stay there. Just want to give you the idea because it is important. The secular state, to me, is being the real. I mean, there's been no real competition among religions. The real competition between what we call the secular state, the Estado laico, which is not exactly secular state, because I know that for Americans, secular state has a stronger meaning of anti-territorialism and anti-religious standing. But for us, what we call Estado laico is not exactly that. Particularly recently, when we call Estado laico, lay state, being trying to introduce that states also the idea of lay state, which is different from secular state. Related to this idea of laicidad, laicity, it's a different thing. So the lay state is the one who's been really competition in terms of cultural competition, trying to introduce the new notions that I talked about in the first part. And of course, that's a different problem where we are trying to get into today, but it's important because as long as the society becomes more and more plural, the importance and the need of the secular state, or lay state, becomes bigger in Mexico and in most Latin American countries. So, talking about and trying to finish this, religious narratives and how people really mix their beliefs. Some of you are going to talk about that more intensely. But I think we can get into this idea of values as a toolkit from which people how to act and how to build a narrative, a religious narrative, which is always very complex, particularly for families. So you have this is an example of that. Also of transnational impact of that. Of course, we have the Santa Muerte and the Guadalupe, also related to Santeria, which comes from the Caribbean. So to finish that, the triple transformation of Mexican identity, I would say it has lost religious neutrality. Mexican Catholics is no longer an occupation for membership reduction conversions. Secondly, Catholic norms doctrine has lost social significance, as I showed. And also very important, as democracy advances and pluralism and increasing consciousness of internal diversity, which is, I think, the most important thing for Catholics. So Mexico is no longer a Catholic nation, even though the Pope still says that. Well, Urbanismo is not a reference for everyone, it's a reference for most people, but not for everyone. And competition from religious and other systems of being is increasing, not only from the top, as it used to be, but also from the bottom. That's very important. So, what is the Catholic in 21st century Mexico? I think it's increasingly on the side of the secular, as you can see, for Catholics, and separation of church and state, support freedom of conscience, and consequently some of the other fields that we related to that. But also, it is conscious of the fact that one is living increasingly in an increasingly plural society, and so we need to find political instruments for our existence, not only religious, but also political views. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, hello everybody. I want to first of all greatly send Claudio salutations. We've known each other for 30 years. But when I entered my university with myself and Claudio was also a young professor there, he was one of the nicest persons I've met. But at that moment, to me, a rather strange institution, and we became friends since then. And it's a nice way to be able to remember that 30 years of coming down. And thank you very much, Claudio, for inviting me to Colombia, which of course had a great significance for Mexican anthropology, because it was here that friends all us came to Manuel Gambio in 1921, with his work on the población de Michoacán. So this is a place that's symbolic importance to Mexican anthropology. Actually, what I want to give them very little to do with anthropology. And here I want to mention especially that this is a continuation of the important research project at la Universidad Religiosa, which was coordinated by René de la Torre and Cristina Gutierrez, who taught anthropologists to try to understand quantitative data. So it's kind of funny to be an anthropologist giving their papers based mostly on quantitative data. And it was quite an interesting attempt that well, not attempt, about 2 volumes. And this is a continuation of that volume. And so what we're going to see here, well, it's very well what Loreto gave us. We're going to show here how religious diversity exists in Mexico, basically using the 2010 census. Now, these data show an increasing plurality in religious views and a very large variation at regional state levels. This is sort of be like a quick tour throughout Mexico. And we will see different religious contexts according to the different regional variations. And I want to mention that very important, which allows us to do this, is that the Mexican census does include religion, and
data by country. I think only Brazil is comparable in Latin America. In the US, Brazil is not asked during the census. And this has created a very useful database. Of course, there are some questions as to how the census information should be interpreted and how it can be divided. But we're going to see that we go back. We're going to see 5 different places here: Mexico City, Puebla, Guanajuato, Nuevo León, and Chiapas. To show each of these as representatives of a different region. Now, Roberto gave us some of the basic information on the national level. I just want to mention that he did it very well. Basically, we see a very strong amount of Catholicism just in the 1970s, and a very small number of persons who were not Catholic, basically first Protestants, and eventually the other areas have grown. It's interesting to see here how Catholicism is basically showing at increasing level. Protestantism has grown, but also the interesting background without religion. Operation as we don't have a religion. Now, these last two tables show that a little bit of proliferation point or census. With these three studies said that the gradual decline of Catholicism in almost monopolist situation took us across believers. This has 2 periods which we can find: 1970 to 1990 and 2000 to 2010. Both of them periods of crisis and social transformation in Mexico. Apparently, an equilibrium was established between 19 and 2000 that was not sustained. Protestant and evangelical groups showed progressive growth nationally, so very strong movement, especially during the first crisis, 1970 to 1990. Other things have been spread, but now there seems to be a certain equilibrium between recent decades. And usually, population without religion grew again from 2000 to 2010. Now, Mexico City. Okay, so this is Mexico City, Distrito Federal, which is practically a city-state. It's recognized as such. So it's very metropolitan area, a very small rural area, which is basically a protected zone in what is Milpa Alta and Xochimilco, but otherwise from the very urbanized area. Officially, 8 million people do the calculations that even say even 20 million people that very exaggerated, that's by adding on the greater metropolitan area. It's more conservative population. You can see, but in 2010, 82% of the population passed Protestant 5.3, with little evangelicals, 1.3, other religions 0.4, without religion 5.6, and not just 5.8. There again, you can see the still 80% of people in the day are Catholic, but it is a number which is decreasing. And there's some interesting characteristics in Mexico City. The last census showed the majority of Catholicism was below the national average. This has never happened before. The Archdiocese of the capital remains the most populous in the world after that of Sao Paulo, Brazil. It contains the sanctuary with the most visitors in the Catholic world, which is the Basilica de Guadalupe, the Basilica de Tepeyac, the Virgin of Guadalupe. It actually ties with St. Peter's in Rome in numbers of visitors, and some years it's a little bit over, sometimes St. Peter's, but it's practically this type of visit. And St. Peter's, in Rome, it only gains the vanishing amount of money it receives. After that, the next one is again the Basilica of Guadalupe. So this shows how important it is. A significant percentage of Protestant and evangelical population are in Mexico City. There are many Pentecostal groups, especially in Iztapalapa, Iztacalco, and Tláhuac, which are the lower, the more popular sect. The historic Protestant churches established in Mexico City since 1870. They were also important and developed the populations of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. The category of other religions very diverse in Mexico City. It is probably the city with the greatest diversity of religion. Even though many of these groups are not that large.
Carlos says the census itself that uses the term biblical evangelical.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes. They didn't know what to call Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. But there was a large discussion as to what to call, because it was evidenced by them that they were not Protestants. This came after 1970. It said you can no longer be putting Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses as Protestants, but they're growing too much. So they came up with this really strange term, which is, as you have seen, non-biblical evangelicals.
But you were the one who.
I was the one I sit down here, well, not part of evangelical. Yeah, because I was one of the persons who mentioned that they were finding Jewish populations in Indian communities in Chiapas who were actually Jehovah's Witnesses. So other religions are very diverse, and they include Islamic groups, Hebrews, spiritualist groups, and Buddhists. Now, an interesting element is that there is a significant portion of people in Mexico City who declare that they do not have a religion. It is the largest non-Catholic minority, non-believers. Now, this is even higher than the number of Protestants. This doesn't occur in any other federal entity. This means that it does have a strong tendency towards secularization. There is a high level of education in the Distrito Federal, and it is home to many national newspapers, along with large internet coverage. The controversies of the Catholic Church may have affected affiliation in Mexico City. And in this case, it is interesting that it separates that from any other regional entity. No religion and no specific religion give more than 10% of the population of the Distrito Federal. People will simply say, we don't want to believe in anything. Puebla is right next door. It's right next to the AFA, but it's very different. I chose Puebla to be able to show an entity which is a federal state, which is right next to the AFA, but which is very different. In Puebla, we have a much clearer Catholic majority. We have a small group of Protestants, 5.8, and here we see other categories in much more traditional. You see here very strong element of Catholicism, super amount of Protestancy, and small number of biblical evangelicals, other religions, some religions not specified. This is a state with a strong Catholic affiliation that is above the national average, which is not surprising, given that traditionally it has been considered as some of the same part of conservative religiosity. There were two dioceses in Puebla. One is Puebla del Angelopolis. Its official name is City of Angels, and Michoacán. We have various important sanctuaries and one of the largest conservative Catholic seminaries in the country. Protestant membership is below the national average, although there are an long tradition and at least this is an interesting thing. The duration of Protestantism has no relation to the number of members. Some cases we have growing churches that have existed for a long time, but which really have not had sustained growth. Now, whether that shows one tendency which we will be here. The largest number of indigenous population are the ones who are members who have converted to Protestantism, basically Pentecostalism. The largest number of Protestants are found in Indian communities in the Sierra Norte de Puebla, and some of the Chiapas, only highest number of believers. This will reappear various times. Indians clearly native Indian American or Indian languages clearly converge more to Protestantism and Catholicism. There are also small groups of Jehovah's and Mormons in the state. There are certain Christians in Judaism. The sectors of without religion and those who do not declare barely have 4%. So this is an interesting contrast. Next one. Guanajuato. Guanajuato is the most Catholic state in Mexico. It is there in the center. Here you'll see 93.8% of the population is Catholic. There's a very small number of people who belong to 12 religions, and people who declare not having a religion is the lowest in the country, 0.4. There's practically no one in Guanajuato was around saying so it's here is a very high number of Catholics. Now, Guanajuato, the most Catholic state in the country, it has two important dioceses, León and Celaya, and it's part of what is called hard part of national South, Central West region, including Jalisco, Aguascalientes, and Michoacán. It has a very important food site, several included. I did find that there was a relation between national Catholic shrines and Catholic affiliation. But that there is national Catholic shrines are supported Catholic identity. Now, one of the interesting things about this is a historical area of the still war scenarios. Every migration to the U.S. has not affected Catholic affiliation. There are some scholars who maintain that migration actually adds on to religious conversion. In Mexico, not. The area which has had the strongest historical migration, Guanajuato, Jalisco, Michoacán, are strongly Catholic. So the migration is not the most important factor in this change. Protestant population is the lowest in the country. It includes historical and Pentecostal churches. There are also some groups of Jehovah's Witnesses in the municipalities. It is interesting that people without religion and who do not take the Lord on are just 2.5%, fairly matching Protestant population. Now, Nuevo León, I decided to give a state of a border state. Nuevo León is also heavily Catholic, but here we see a stronger presence of Protestantism and a small amount of without religion. You see that Protestants and also without religion. Nuevo León is basically a border state. What we see there is a stronger presence of Protestant groups, which are strongly organized in Nuevo León, with Protestant Church in Mexico was organized in Monterrey, and there is still a strong national element. But the Catholicism is still very strong in Nuevo León, and it is not as secularized as Mexico City. Now, the least Catholic state in Mexico, Chiapas, which is on the border with Guatemala. Chiapas is practically a different country religiously. 58% of the population is Catholic, 19% Protestant evangelicals, and the other large group is without religion. You see there how it has diminished Catholicism under 60%. And Chiapas is the state with the highest percentage of religious diversity in the country. Now, it's very interesting. This is, of course, again, a border state. Here, there is a stronger similarity of Chiapas to Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. Then there is to Guanajuato, Jalisco, or Aguascalientes. It clearly is culturally more closer to Central America. The state has 3 dioceses. Tapachula, Tuxtla Gutiérrez, and San Cristóbal de las Casas. Here, there was a strong movement of liberation theology and indigenous theology driven by the late Bishop John Luis. Chiapas has a strong indigenous population. A significant part of the ethnic groups have left Catholicism. The growth of Protestant churches is evident in the state. It includes historical and Pentecostal churches who have strong contact with sister groups in Central America especially Guatemala. The relations between Guatemala and Chiapas have always been pretty strong, and in the religious area, they really founded many Pentecostal sister organizations in Guatemala, and many pastors, rock groups, and members continue to go between Chiapas and Central America. In Chiapas, the non-evangelical principles include Seventh-day Adventist, Jehovah's Witnesses, many churches, and a Muslim church in San Cristobal de las Casas. In San Cristobal, there's a space of immense religious plurality, and there are now two different Muslim groups in San Cristobal de las Casas. One is Sufi and another one is Sunita. So in San Cristobal, actually all religions and Muslim. In Chiapas, people without religion and who did not answer under creed include some special features which difference it from other parts of the country. It brings together people who would not mention their religion to a conflict between faiths that have affected some municipality. There have been religious conflicts in Chiapas by which the number of people who declared that they did not have a religion is strong in this state, not necessarily because there are more atheists in Chiapas than in other states, but do that because of religious conflicts. Some people prefer not to mention what religion they had in the census state. Therefore, regional elements make it very misunderstandable. That's why, like I said, census doesn't mean the same thing today as it means in Chiapas. There are also indigenous people in certain areas who use the term nativism or who specify their religion as the name of the ethnic. Say practice in Indian religion. Here the census actually silences those voices. Even though where are they? As non-religious. Right? We have heard of it. Well, these people don't understand the answer, so let's go into this category. And the form of silencing Indian religions. Conclusions. Okay, so we've actually ended the tour, and this shown that this is a significant religious diversity in Mexican states. This is an important factor that will affect the country. We now see an important amount of religious pluralism, and we do not see any return to a religious monopoly of Catholicism, which is something that some members of the Catholic hierarchy still dream of returning to a Catholic Mexico. It's clear that this will not exist. And what is interesting is that we see the existence of actually very different regions, very different to see religion in Guanajuato than it is in Chiapas, than it is in the Bay Area. But it's important to carry out an inclusive policy that will be able to carry out tolerance between religion in Mexico that will be negotiated with resolutions of conflicts of belief on the model of a secular state, which respects the equality of beliefs. Thank you.
like to encourage competition. It's very difficult to know what to do with it. You also just how often first of all, I really want to I want to ask you to try to show some data that I know that someone is so we are going to be so it's very good to talk now before others and because I'm going to talk about and all my work is about this language. I'm trying to so I'm going to show you some of these I'm going to try to show you one program where we can see how so so I have some transitions but again I'm going to do something else now I'm going to try to show two kinds of development. One about the religious side, the university religious side, and the other that so the work of practice. So, you know, if you have some information around it's a very 50 years ago, it's not a traditional it's a cool and it has grown very in the last years. Now we have 13,000 inhabitants, and so there's growing by only 3,000. So now it's only two first levels. And it's made of so it's very positive. Otherwise, this one absolutely more here is the neighborhood very near and in the south. So, what about the religious side? First, we have to say that the chapter was intense activity and participation, almost 30 masses and Sunday service, and there was always so that was talking about the school churches here's what the case always so more mentioned the program. First, we have the focus on churches. I have the district. I will have the graduates. I will choose different there are positions that are the situation the laterals, they are more conservative. And we have that means administrate it's a very different case. It's very difficult to have in 2-3 hours we have the one the left having you have 2 stories of 7 people for configuration, 2 loading and so that's one. What about expressions of popular religions? So we have, I'm going to come back to the progress. We have a lot of popular religions in 3 dimensions. That is, one is the physical model that they are they belong to the church. And the church that the intermediate model for the age of the church authorities in the leaders, and the autonomous model that they are targeting us that belongs as the how you have, we're going to see now, 52 chapters that they program it's about the way to see that. 4 chapters for the one moment of use for the top and in the conference where we are showing that with all the years, the important context of the sample of the it's impossible to know how many practice have their effects. And we have the process of learning information. We have 2 primary chromosomes of the Santa Monica, one is the Santa Monica, and 2 Santerias. Let's see that in but if we see the evolution, here we have the but if we see the quantity of others universities, because we have a lot of and they are different by Okay, but the what is that all these shopping have different life. So you can have only shopping life. Only one person who's account with one of these. Or you can shop this side. And we are going to in the center one party big party. So we are going to have a big. So it's incredible with my dad. It's not different. You can see the it's important to see all the positions because they are team of change but all the things are Western. Show when we see the quantity of so it's so so now we talk about the divide. Now we talk about the beliefs and what all the features in the first, it's in terms of interesting that in the case of all the with the data that Carlos are going to show, we saw that always in the pattern of the surveys are that you can be consulted, you can be over ratio, and you can be without ratio. And normally the difference is a bipolar ratio with the catholics and the other religions. And normally the other religions they are not as important as the other. So here we have a tripolar experience where the Catholic, the without religions are more important than the other religions. And in the only case, if we make the operation, we make the it's the only case where it has this characteristic. And you can see that the algorithm is more important than all the other possibilities, even the jobs. So you have a tripolar. That's the third principle. Second, if we saw the differences around the age, and we have only more points, we can see that the younger people are less common that are the old people, and here you can see. If we continue with the view, we can see an example that for the traditional policies, not very important, but it's not as important as not for the but if you answer for the problems and approach, there's more answers. And here it is very good because we can see that those operations and skills are the almost same percentage between the group 1 and group 2. Here, I think it's interesting this question because we were said, how often we pray? So, more important for the others. But if you ask the character in how often you make character in very true, very true person of young people say that price character. So you can show that a important level of well, the third point in the weeks books are what I call the three matches of the. I think that we can see three matches. One around the traditional policies, the other around religiosity, and the other the religion. Other religions, I don't know. I put their derivation over. So you can see the traditional policies that are very important for us. What God is treating, very percent is very good answer. And it's even here to see that the positive values of the policy they are more important than the negative values. The heaven and God they are very important, and heaven and hell are not as important as maybe we can make our profession. Here, for the popular religion, we see that 7% use the spirituality, and 7.81% has an altar. That's from and the 88% of people that has that has for religion. There's something very important. I think that you went around what's going on in this platform. There's a place where you can do everything. You can have water, you can have an apple, you can have the air, the picture of the father. And the other reference have a web of 60%, always for 12%. You have, when you answer, you click in the same energy, 72% said that this is. And what God, we have the different responses, 24%, and Habitat Force, 30%. Where is God? Everywhere.
Can you repeat the question?
Por practicar, entonces, eso significa que la gente puede ser católica, probablemente practicar otras.
Ese es el punto clave. So, this is the two that but what I think is that finally you can have what I name the complex articulation of beliefs, where you can make an articulation how you want around these two methods, and you can put something on one, something on the other, and make whatever. I have some problems of a lot of work. I'm not going to do it. Only to say you that it's a very complex from one woman of 60 years old that she's spirit of the and that she was in the Zapatismo, which is very vital. That became global. And she is now, she is militant and she has in her so here you can see how she talks about the energy and how you have to live forth and Jesus and you have the other form that is here, we have young Babalao of 20 years he's there in the garage of his home, and he talked about the energy and how he used the energy to you can see that the old movement militant of the Protestant church and the Babalao, it's young people, young men, they are talking about the energy like one how one act. Here you have one bracket of one girl. She was a student of 20 years old. And when I asked what she told me, I believe God when I am in the church. I believe God when I am in the spirituality. And I believe I feel God when I am in the religion. So when I asked, where do you feel more God? She said that in the two places she did well, some conclusions. First, it's not in me, but it's important to say that the monopolistic institutions of sense that have lost particularly in the ecclesiastical. This is seen on the one hand, I think, in the diversification of institutional salvation, and one other in the point of the of it. Second, the believer is responsible of making sense without of their own part. Sense out of their own life. In order to achieve this, it should go to the small further part without asking the queries or concepts. Third, in this process, the believer makes a complex combination where each seems mainly improve the experience. So one has to understand the experience that there is of go, witness, testify, and experience something. Fourth, I think that we have to think around the problems in four first, obviously, the accessibility of the believers rather than of the institution. Routine the nature of the religious institution and its pros and its problems. Third, routine the classical and pure believer category like missionary projects, increasing revolutionary cooperation, etc. And the rather seek for combination of Catholics and religions. Of Catholics and leftists, progressists, all Santeria, all that, but I think that the pure model is not as rich, as interesting, as similar as the combination different that people are doing. Or otherwise, the image believes that all the articulation of the different going force. For example, with the angelical, it's very good because you have I do believe in the angels, but the oracles are different from the young that's something about cosmic form, the say the moon, something like that, and the angels or the older people that believe in the angels. So you have there one saga. Finally, between the age, which would be about more sensitive. And finally, thank you very much.
Our final presentation was morning, started with the along
First of all, thank you very much to the Professor for the moments, for extending the generous invitation, and also a special thanks to our Argentine scholar in residence down the island at NYU, Graciela Machkowski, right? Sometimes it's kind of hard to come back to this, my original topic of research. I actually started my career as a Brazilianist. And indeed, 22 years ago, my first book was on the Pentecostal boom in Brazil. And indeed, 22 years later, Brazil really still is the epicenter of the Pentecostal boom in Latin America. In fact, I'd argue other places that there's one country in the world that really is the most important for both the present and the future of global Christianity. It's Brazil. But here we're talking about Mexico today. But I'm going to blow things up even larger than macro Mexico, and I'm going to do macro Latin America, since I was the lead academic consultant for the 2014 Pew survey of 30,000 Latin Americans. Pretty extensive, the most extensive ever. But I will make special references to the Mexican situation, since we are here focusing on Mexico. But again, my last 6 years have been researching Santa Muerte. My book was the first in English on the subject. In fact, I'm working on the sequel now. So if I have any lapses and I go back to Santa Muerte, please forgive me. But of course, our esteemed colleague, Jose Carlos, will be speaking on Santa Muerte this afternoon, correct? And Santa Muerte actually comes into this because I've also used the paradigm of religious economy, looking at this whole Pentecostalization of the Latin American Christian landscape through the lens of religious competition. And I think Santa Muerte, to some extent, also can be viewed as that. There's not a week that doesn't go by in Mexico without some Mexican bishop or archbishop now condemning Santa Muerte. In fact, just yesterday, the Archbishop of Jalapa, just on the eve of Easter, condemned Santa Muerte astrology and Satanism to boot. So I'm going to have a very macro focus and bounce off this 2014 Pew survey. The Pew survey found what we had suspected. I thought the great Catholic hemorrhaging really had started in the 1950s. Pew, however, finds that it starts in the 1970s. The Catholic losses have been so great, get this, that today Brazil, the largest Catholic population on earth, is now only 61% Catholic. In fact, I project that by 2030, within 15 years, get this, Brazil will no longer be a Catholic majority nation. Kind of a mirror image of the United States, which for a few years now has no longer been a Protestant majority nation. If here in the United States, 1 in 10 American adults is a former Catholic, in Brazil, our largest Catholic nation on earth, now 20% of Brazilian adults are former Catholics. A few countries now are no longer Catholic majority. Anybody know one of them? Latin American nation that no longer is Catholic majority. Unfortunately, Cuba wasn't. It's probably true. Cuba wasn't. Yeah, Honduras and Uruguay no longer are Catholic majority nations. Honduras is only 40% Catholic now, according to the Pew survey. Uruguay, the lowest in the region, maybe not as low as Cuba, but now Cuba's opening up and Cuba will be in there, part of the Yankee reinvasion of Cuba. Uruguay now is talk about secularism, the most secular nation by far of the Americas, forget Latin America, of the Americas, Uruguay, with only 42% Catholic and 33% no religious affiliation whatsoever. 33%. Anybody know what that figure is in the United States of the unaffiliated? Yeah, it's about 16%. Uruguay is double the United States. Huh? Oh, I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it is. In terms of Mexico, Pew basically, you show the figures. Mexico, despite the fact that we do find significant Catholic decline, is still the second most Catholic nation in Latin America at 81%, Pew around 81% Catholic. The only country with a higher proportion of Catholic population is Paraguay. Paraguay is 89% Catholic. In general, if we divide Latin America into regions, Catholicism continues to be strongest in South America, particularly the Andean nations, and in Mexico as well. And of course, the institutional Catholic Church was strongest historically in the two centers of Spanish Empire, Mexico and Peru. Pew also finds that the exponential Pentecostal growth really dates from the 1970s. So we've basically been looking at 4 decades of very rapid Pentecostal growth. I used to get into arguments with some of my colleagues who would say, no, this is a growing pie for all. The Pentecostal growth is not coming at the expense of Catholicism. Well, that's simply not true. The great majority of those who converted to Pentecostal churches are people who grew up as Catholics. Most of them were nominal Catholics, non-institutionally practicing Catholics. Nonetheless, Pentecostalism has reaped a bonanza harvest from this great sea of nominal Catholics, those who really don't have any significant ties to the institutional Catholic Church. Brazil, again, really is the epicenter of this Pentecostal boom. Brazil now is not only the largest Catholic population on earth, it now also has the largest Pentecostal population. There are more Pentecostals in Brazil today, even than here in the United States, where, of course, the movement was born at the beginning of the 20th century. And by the way, Brazil also leads the pack. Its overall Protestant population is now second in the world, second only to the United States. Mexico, the Pentecostalization of Christianity is there, but it's behind the general curve of Latin America overall. Mexican Protestants, according to Pew, are 59% Pentecostal, close to 2/3. Compared to 65% for Latin America. So about 2/3 of all Protestants in Latin America are Pentecostal. The greatest Pentecostal growth by far has been in two regions, Central America and the Caribbean. And I think we also know that it's booming in Cuba as well. We have a lot of these home churches as well, but soon Pew and other groups will be in there to give us the raw data we need on the Cuban visitors. The only two nations in Latin America which have Protestant populations less than 10% are actually Mexico and Paraguay. All other Latin American nations have at least a 10% population of Protestants. Now, even though I was a consultant for the Pew survey, I don't necessarily agree in their findings on what is the primary factor behind compelling these great conversions to Pentecostals. Pew states that the most common reason cited by the 30,000 survey takers was they were seeking a more personal connection with God, more personal connection. That I find a bit vague, although I think if we're going to delve into the greater intimacy and personal connection, I think that's part of it as well. But in my own research, in fact, in my first book, Born Again in Brazil, what I found really was a crucial factor driving conversions to Pentecostalism was faith healing. And that goes back to your whole talk about the Pentecostal business of rehab centers. Really at the core of Pentecostal praxis and belief is faith healing. And so I found in the Amazonian city of Belém, where I conducted most of my research, that the great majority of converts who'd grown up as nominal Catholics converted at the time of a health crisis. A health crisis they weren't able to resolve within their native religious context, usually nominal Catholicism, or I was in the Amazon, so sometimes they might seek out an Amazonian shaman for healing. And people tend to be rather practical and utilitarian in their quest for help. And those who would see those who could would see a doctor, try to scrape enough cash for pharmaceuticals. But those who failed would often end up at the doors of a Pentecostal temple, because one of the great components of the Pentecostal message is accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and you will be healed of all your earthly afflictions. And the type of afflictions that we're mostly talking about that compel converts are alcoholism, what I call the pathogens of poverty. Alcoholism, domestic abuse, and real physical illness, which we all know that the poor in Latin America suffer at much great rates. Still today, even in American evangelicalism, this emphasis on health, in fact, as the health and wealth gospel, really is at the center stage of this type of evangelical Protestantism. I think there's also other components. I think in particularly the Central American and the Brazilian context, where we see in the Brazilian context and the Caribbean context a disproportionate number of Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Brazilian believers. In fact, by far, Afro-Brazilians are much more Pentecostal than they are practitioners of the Afro-Brazilian religions of Umbanda and Candomblé. And so there's a real opportunity for Afro-Brazilian men to move up in the world of pastorship. I have a long-term friend who's an Assembly of God pastor in the city of Belém, dirt poor in the northeastern Brazilian city of Piauí, and has made a great career as Assembly of God pastor. He's been to Israel many times, many countries in Europe. And for an Afro-Brazilian to excel in secular society beyond the traditional venues of sports and music is really difficult. And so, there's this whole kind of ethic of entrepreneurship, which Pentecostals allow men who don't have much formal education, and yet if they're gifted, if they're charismatic and can preach, They can do really well for themselves. They can grow their church. They can maybe get the tithe to not only be 10%, but maybe 30%, with 10% going for each person of the Holy Spirit. That's a joke that goes on in Brazil. We're collecting 30%, 10% for the Holy Spirit, 10% for God, and 10% for the Son. So why am I talking about Pentecostalization? Because we're not only specifically talking about this particular branch of Protestantism that has been prospering. It has been prospering to such an extent that across the Christian divide in the Catholic camp, what we have witnessed since the early 1970s is the Pentecostalization of Latin American Catholicism. To a lesser extent in Mexico, but the Catholic Charismatic Renewal was born here in the United States at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh in 1967. Is exported to Latin America within a few years. By the early 1970s, and it's in most Latin American nations. It's contemporaneous with the base Christian communities in liberation theology, yet base Christian communities are basically dead. I'm kind of surprised, of course, that Pope Francis is somewhat resurrecting the discourse of liberation theology. But as an ecclesial, as a pastoral movement, liberation theology basically doesn't exist anymore. Yet, 4 decades later, 40% of Latin American Catholics are charismatic. That number is much smaller in Mexico, only about a quarter, more specifically, I think 26% of Mexican Catholics are charismatic. But in some countries, such as Brazil, which really is the epicenter of the global Catholic charismatic movement, more than 60% of Brazilians, Guatemalans, and Hondurans are charismatic Catholics. Even here in the United States, the future of the Catholic Church in this country is a Latino one. That's part of the reason why you hear this larger chorus of American bishops talking about the issue of immigration. If it were not for Mexican and Central American immigration, the Catholic Church in the United States would have experienced the same precipitous decline that the historic Protestants, the Methodists, Presbyterians, and the Episcopalians have. The only reason they held their own is because of specifically Mexican and Central American immigration. While among Latino Catholics in the United States, 46%, almost half of them, are Catholic charismatics. A movement which was born among Euro-American Catholics in Pittsburgh and the Midwest, but basically doesn't exist anymore. You won't find any more Euro-American Catholics or charismatics. It has become an exclusively Latino movement here in the United States. So, given the great exodus of nominal Catholics into Pentecostalism, the reason that we see the Pentecostalization of Catholicism is their best way to attempt to compete with Pentecostal growth. Because it's basically, in fact, for their first 5 or 6 years of existence into about 1972, 1973, both here in the United States and in Latin America, they actually called themselves Pentecostal Catholics. You can imagine that didn't sit too well with the bishops. Roberto and I were discussing how in the early 70s, mid-70s, some of the most vociferous voices against the movement actually were Mexican bishops who saw the smoke of Satan rising from the charismatic renewal. Nonetheless, get this, a movement that only arrives in the early 70s has region-wide episcopal approval by 1986. The Brazilian Bishops' Conference in 1986 are the last ones to give official approval of the Catholic Charismatic Renewal. So in less than the space of 15 years, the movement, which just arrived in the early 70s, has region-wide acceptance. This is lightning pace, of course, for the Catholic Church. I'm going to go so far and argue, and I have argued in other venues, that one of the primary reasons we see our first New World Pope is because of Pentecostal competition. I was out there betting, oh, no, the papacy's got to return to Italy. I'm saying, no, look, 40% of the world's Catholics are in Latin America. Yet Pew and others show us this precipitous decline, this hemorrhaging. We need to do something to stop the bleeding. And the best strategy so far has been to offer the Catholic charismatic renewal, which offers believers the same type of ecstatic spirituality found in the pews of Pentecostal churches, yet you can retain Virgin Guadalupe or whichever virgin or saint you prefer as well. So in theory, as a Catholic charismatic, you have the best of both worlds. You have the ecstatic spirituality plus the saints and the various manifestations of the Virgin that you grew up with. And I would argue, well, this is somewhat conjecture, I would argue that the bleeding of the Catholic Church would have been even greater in many nations in Latin America if it weren't for the promotion of the Catholic charismatic renewal. I should add that it is the most dynamic form of Catholicism, not only in Latin America, throughout the world. The third largest Catholic country on earth, the Philippines, the Catholic Church in the Philippines is completely charismatic. Some 80% of Filipino Catholics are charismatic, and the dynamic surge of Catholicism in parts of Africa also is based on the growth of charismatics as well. I should also add, going back to the Protestant camp, that the old school, old line historic Protestants, such as the Presbyterians, I grew up in a Presbyterian church and a preacher's ship, my father was a retired Presbyterian pastor. The Presbyterian church, the Methodists and stuff, in order to be able to compete in most countries in Latin America with the Pentecostals, have themselves also had to Pentecostalize. In fact, there's even breakaway Methodist and Pentecostal denominations in Brazil that call themselves Presbyterianos Renovados, or renewed Presbyterians as well. So, the larger picture here, and we also see evidence of this showing up in various charismatic practices. For example, exorcism. We see an explosion of exorcism. 1/3 of all Protestants and 1/5 of all Catholics have either experienced or witnessed an exorcism. 1/3 of all Protestants and 1/5 of all Latin American Catholics have witnessed or either experienced an exorcism. Again, Mexico is somewhat behind the curve on this. For Mexico, 28% of Protestants have either experienced or witnessed a church and exorcism, and Catholics, only 8% of Mexican Catholics, despite the fact that in our Santa Muerte research, there's been all this slew of articles about how all these priests throughout Mexico are performing exorcism rituals on people who are possessed by the spirit of Santa Muerte. 83% of Mexican Protestants and 50% of Catholics have at least on one occasion heard speaking in tongues, faith healing, or prophesying. Speaking in tongues, faith healing, or prophesying. So it's 50% of Catholics in Mexico and 83% of Protestants. You can see that these hallmarks of Pentecostal type, the so-called gifts of the Spirit, are hegemonic. And Mexico is actually low on these figures again compared to the Latin American average. The larger picture that's already been alluded to by Carlos and Roberto and other speakers is even beyond the Pentecostalization. I should also add the Pentecostalization, overarching Pentecostalization, is also an African phenomenon as well, and certain countries in Asia, such as the Philippines, even China, from the statistics that we can learn there as well. So it's in general, it's a global South phenomenon, not only Latin America. And what the Pew survey shows and other recent surveys show as well, is this is also part of the overarching pluralization of the Latin American religious landscape, in which vanguard countries like Uruguay now have up to a third of the religiously non-affiliated. And this doesn't mean that they don't believe in something or they don't practice something at home. This just means they don't have any institutional religious ties, which I think we need to be careful to parse out a difference between being atheist and agnostic and not having a specific institutional affiliation. If I remember my stats, I think the overall figure for Latin America is now 8% of Latin Americans have no religious affiliation, with relatively wide regional variation. If I'm not mistaken, I think that number growing trend in the United States as well. It's about 15 or 16%. And of course, as you showed in your own stats, it tends to be more accentuated among the young, particularly those who are under 25. And I think this, I'll also, Roberto, you made a comment about the linkage perhaps between Catholicism and violence. But as I'm thinking, and I was curious about protection, the need for protection that came up in your survey, and I would say that that really is an across-the-board appeal of all popular religion. In fact, even Santa Muerte, a lot of people look to La Flaquita as a great protectress from the crime. Some actually ask her to help them perpetrate crimes, but others also look to her as a protectress as well. And it's interesting, the most horrific violence, of course, is in Central America. Honduras, the highest murder rate in the world. El Salvador, Guatemala are our top 5. So this is a real paroxysm of violence in Central America, yet it's our least Catholic region and most Protestant region that's experiencing this violence. So I don't necessarily think we can make that link as well. I'm also thinking about how we're 35 years now, the anniversary of Archbishop Oscar Romero's assassination. When he was assassinated in 1980, El Salvador was 90% Catholic. Today, El Salvador is 50% Catholic, just 35 years later. So again, beyond this great Pentecostalization of Latin American Christianity, the overarching tendency is pluralization. An increasing number of, especially young Latin Americans, opt for no religious affiliation, or opt for Santa Muerte or Jehovah's Witnesses, or the whole panoply that we've had for many decades in the United States. This increasingly variegated, robust religious marketplace that continues to be governed by the logic of competition. And yes, of course, the state is a competitor as well, but we can't ignore the really intense inter-religious competition as a factor, and that explains why we see the Pentecostalization of Christianity, because of the great success of Pentecostalism and the relative failure of liberation theology and the base Christian communities to become a truly popular movement. In Brazil, where the base Christian communities found their most fertile soil, not more than 4% of Brazilian Catholics ever participated in a base Christian community. In Brazil, the most fertile soil. So 4 decades later, again, it's all about the Catholic charismatic.
We don't really have time for discussion. Is there any, if there's anyone who wants to raise a question from the one to linger in the air, so that we have that chance in the background, we can do that right now without any response to this, so that we can practically come back. We're going to have one to time for discussion tomorrow, and we have to take questions right now. I know that. So should we do that? Is there any
Yeah, we did a remark on what Amit said about happening to non-profits. Companies in Central America and Latin America. One of the things I think we should have to take is what Bastian said many years ago, 30 years ago, about how actually, how much actually our cultural. So are we? We're talking about conversions, but culturally speaking, we are talking about people who are still African way of thinking. So that's just not to discuss it right now, just report it out there.
So there's a question that has to do with the mingling. Just something that mentioned that Andy just mentioned right now, keeps we are here in this is the effect of migration, and it's very interesting that the Catholic Church, she wasn't that refugee in Mexico, and even well, maybe immigration strategy failed, what was the role of migrants in sustaining their Catholic faith in a strange land? What was not originally there, and an institution which was dominated by Irishmen and Italians, and the reporting role in maintaining the role of Catholicism, which is different with the idea that often in many sociological the migrants will change their face, and in many cases reaffirm their faith. I think maybe we should just encourage piece of data for your information. Issue with the data that he's very happy to say that.
How do you prove that you have converted them? So we made churches a question of revelation, so it's not so intimate that one of the very well discussed about priests, where if you have the cost of the work of the priest, and you are in a room without the cost of and they discover that you are taking, you get these without the main elements. They can be catched, that cost because the more of the spiritual strongest in the church who are Judaism, and to convert to Judaism actions, it's really hard, and it's really hard for them, and they have to go through, let's say, position, and a lot of rituals in Hebrew, it's very responsible where all these conversions will happen. And when you study the pattern part of what churches, how does it change, how much you have to is there like a process of how much you feel like
That's that question is very
just to understand when we said that is part of our culture, so we are obligated to know what is humanism, because Catholicism is everything in Mexico.
But it's the culture, the dominant culture and it's everything. It's liberal, it's conservative, it's traditional, it's anti-market, it's Pentecostal, it's everything. And I think we should make this court to classify the distinct ways to be the Catholic culture. Because it's difficult to do.
We summarize this problem in part. That problem is to do it in the case of Mexico, questions. So we're talking about a situation where also and fall back category. That is, everybody goes down there, unless we counter. And especially the sector of state, very much the case. All that situation. That certain prejudice to thinking about the causes of cultural formation rather than that's the roots of the which is seen so that's a strong problem of what that was.
Yeah, I used to work on continue on that line of analysis and also be with your recommendation. These operators deep in Mexico also led to a re-evaluation of institutions. So we should get the new state of Mexico nowadays legalize what concerns the abortion rights and particular situations or even on the same-sex partnership. So there's a backlash as well, which also component of these television proposals.
Just maybe we can just ties up what Scott said and one of the issues that brought us, I think, from the beginning, government having the lack of automation in certain kind of spaces of infectious by the state, and how that generates new forms of social forms connected to governmentality and connected in new ways. Knowledge to a large extent, that's part of table as a launch profession. Covers also it seems that the use of the state, the occupation of the state, security will becomes more of an issue, and that's the question there is who will that are against the occupation of the state. And that's an interesting thing. It doesn't mention that there is a geography of politics around, particularly around abortion. Right? Where it is body. So maybe we could start with that and look for the conference. We return again for our session, which is to do with consciousness. Is human justice. So we expect to hear to have a before discussion. We have a question it's going to be upstairs. And so actually those of you who were not on
Can I take a picture with the session one and Karen?
Sí, ¿verdad?
Carlos tiene el dedo
Si me da una chica de lo conviertes en
Sure.